Look, I'm not saying I set out to declare war on the homeowners association. I'm a reasonable guy. I pay my taxes. I separate my recycling. I pretend to like my brother-in-law's craft beer. But when a woman whose only joy comes from measuring lawn height tells you your son's happiness is out of compliance, you have two choices: comply or get creative. I chose creative. And a lot of rope. It all started, as most suburban conflicts do, with a dream. Not my dream, but my 8-year-old son Leo's. He came to me one Saturday morning, clutching a piece of construction paper with the solemn importance of a diplomat presenting a treaty. On it, rendered in the glorious, physics-defying medium of crayon, was a drawing of our backyard. Specifically, the ancient, sprawling oak tree that stood like a silent guardian near the back fence. And nestled in its branches was a structure that was part castle, part spaceship, and all ambition. "It's a sky castle, Dad," he announced, his voice hushed with reverence. "It needs a telescope to see aliens, and a secret trapdoor." I looked at his drawing, then out the window at the magnificent old oak. I'm a project manager in the soul-crushing world of enterprise software solutions. My days are spent in meetings about synergy and optimizing workflows. I build things you can't see or touch. But here, in my son's eyes, was a request to build something real. Something with splinters and the smell of fresh-cut pine. Something that could host a boy and his imagination. "A sky castle," I repeated, nodding seriously. "You're right. It does need a trapdoor, and a snack pulley. You can't fight aliens on an empty stomach." His face lit up with the kind of pure, unadulterated joy that could power a small city. My wife, Sarah, walked in, coffee mug in hand, and glanced at the drawing. She gave me that look. The one that's one part all, that's sweet and 9 parts. I know exactly where this is going. "Mark," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "You remember what happened when you tried to build that bookshelf, right? It still leans." "That was a load-bearing issue," I said defensively. "This is different. This is for the boy. It's a sacred duty." The next 2 weekends were a blur of glorious, chaotic construction. Our trips to the hardware store became legendary expeditions. Leo would ride in the giant cart like a king on his throne, pointing out essential supplies like candy bars and novelty keychains. I, meanwhile, was trying to remember the difference between a lag bolt and a carriage bolt, nodding intelligently at the bored teenager in the orange apron, who clearly knew more about structural engineering than I ever would. We didn't build a sky castle. We built something better. A sturdy, slightly crooked, 4-walled fort on a platform wedged securely between 2 massive limbs of the oak. It wasn't a masterpiece of carpentry. The walls weren't perfectly plumb, and one of the windows was vaguely trapezoidal, but it was ours. We cut the wood together. I'd make the noisy, important-looking cuts with the circular saw, while Leo would follow behind with a piece of sandpaper, smoothing the edges with the intense focus of a surgeon. He painted a wobbly skull and crossbones on one side, declaring it the official flag of Fort Awesome. We installed a bucket on a rope for the all-important snack pulley. We hammered in a collection of old jar lids to serve as the control panel for his spaceship. From the kitchen window, it was a perfect picture of father-son bliss. It was a monument to childhood, standing proudly in our little slice of suburban heaven. Our particular slice of heaven was called Maple Creek Estates, a name that promised rustic charm and delivered a master-planned community where the color palette ranged from greige to slightly darker greige. Every lawn was a uniform height. Every mailbox was an identical HOA-approved shade of Tuscan bronze. It was peaceful. It was clean. It was crushingly, soul-destroyingly uniform. Our little wooden fort, with its imperfect lines and pirate flag, was a vibrant splash of happy rebellion in a sea of beige, and it was being watched. From the house on the corner, the one with the immaculately manicured rose bushes that looked like they were trimmed with nail scissors, a shadow lurked. Carol, president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, a woman who communicated primarily through passive-aggressive newsletter entries and wielded her clipboard like a scepter. We'd see her blinds twitch. Her silhouette would linger for just a moment too long. "She's watching us," Leo would whisper, and we'd both turn and wave with exaggerated cheerfulness. The blinds would snap shut. One afternoon, as we were hauling the final piece of roofing up the rope ladder, Sarah stood on the patio with her arms crossed, a wry smile on her face. "You know," she said, sipping her iced tea, "you've basically built a giant wooden middle finger to the entire concept of this neighborhood." She took a long, slow sip. "You do realize you've awakened the dragon, don't you?" I just grinned, looking up at our magnificent, crooked creation. "Let her breathe fire," I said. "We've got a trapdoor." I had no idea how much fire was coming. The first volley in the Great Tree Fort War was not a volley at all. It was a single, crisp, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't in the mailbox. That would have been too normal, too postal. No, this was taped to our front door with a piece of clear packing tape, positioned precisely at eye level. It had the sterile, menacing aura of a summons. I saw it when I got home from work on Tuesday. "Well, this is official," I muttered, peeling the tape off the freshly painted door, taking a small chip of paint with it. "Of course." "What is it?" Sarah asked as I walked into the kitchen, tossing my keys into the bowl on the counter. "Not sure," I said, examining the envelope. It had no stamp, just my name and address typed in a severe Times New Roman font. "Either we won the lottery or I'm being drafted into the beige paint color committee." I slit it open with a butter knife. The paper inside was thick, expensive, the kind of paper used for bad news. I unfolded it and began to read aloud in my most dramatic, booming voice. "Dear Mr. Stanton," I began, "it has come to the attention of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee." I paused for effect. "That's a lot of capitalized words. This can't be good." Sarah leaned against the counter, already bracing for impact. I continued. "An unapproved, freestanding, auxiliary structure has been erected on your property. This structure is in direct violation of the Maple Creek Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, specifically Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph C, regarding outbuildings and temporary constructions." I looked up at Sarah, my eyebrows raised. "Auxiliary structure? They make it sound like I built a nuclear silo. It's a treehouse." "Keep reading, Atticus Finch," she said dryly. "Furthermore," I read, my voice dripping with disdain, "the presence of said structure creates a significant aesthetic disharmony within the community and negatively impacts the uniform visual landscape that all residents agree to uphold." I scoffed. "Aesthetic disharmony? Carol, my garden gnome has more aesthetic harmony than your beige-on-beige existence." The final paragraph was the kill shot. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that we had 14 days from the date of the notice to completely dismantle and remove the offending structure. Failure to comply would result in an initial fine of $50, followed by a recurring fine of $25 for each day the violation continued. Just then, Leo padded into the kitchen, having heard the commotion. "What's that, Dad?" Before I could hide it, his eyes scanned the paper. He couldn't read all the big words, but he could read the important ones. Tree Fort and remove. His face fell. The triumphant gleam of the fort builder was replaced by the crushing devastation that only an 8-year-old can truly feel. His lower lip began to tremble. They want us to tear down Fort Awesome, he whispered, his voice cracking. And that was it. That was the moment. My mild annoyance at Carol's petty tyranny evaporated, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. I looked from the official letter, with its soulless corporate font, to my son's tear-streaked face. The war was no longer about a pile of wood in a tree. It was about defending a little boy's joy from the crushing gears of bureaucracy. I knelt and looked him in the eyes. "No one," I said, with a gravity I didn't know I possessed, "is tearing down Fort Awesome." I crumpled the letter in my fist. Sarah just closed her eyes and sighed. Here we go. That night, after Leo was asleep, the kitchen table became my war room. My weapon wasn't a sword. It was a highlighter. My enemy wasn't an army. It was a 3-inch thick 3-ring binder with the words Maple Creek Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions embossed in gold on its faux leather cover. Sarah called it the Tome of Torment. "You're really going to read that whole thing?" she asked, pouring herself a glass of wine. "You know that's how they get you. It's designed to bore you into submission." "Never," I vowed, cracking open the binder. A faint, musty smell of institutional oppression wafted out. I poured myself a healthy glass of whiskey. "I'm going in." For the next 3 hours, I descended into a special kind of suburban hell. The level of detail was breathtakingly insane. It was a masterclass in micromanagement. I learned that our trash receptacles could not be visible from the street for more than 4 hours before and after pickup. I discovered that all front-facing flower beds were required to contain at least 3, but no more than 5, distinct varieties of perennial flowers, with tulips being permissible only in shades of red or yellow. No pink. Pink was, presumably, too rebellious. Holiday decorations could not be erected more than 30 days before the holiday, and must be removed within 15 days after. Any satellite dish had to be installed on the rear-facing side of the roofline, regardless of signal reception. My highlighter ran yellow over passages of pure, unadulterated madness. Section 9, subsection B, dictated that basketball hoops had to be of a clear acrylic backboard design and could not have faded nets. Faded nets. It was a document written by people who saw the vibrant, messy chaos of life and wanted to file it away in a beige folder. I got to Bylaw 7, Section 4, Paragraph C, the one that was killing Fort Awesome. It was airtight. No freestanding auxiliary structure, including but not limited to sheds, gazebos, playhouses, or tree forts exceeding a height of 6 feet, may be erected without prior written consent from the Architectural Review Committee. It was a catch-all, a perfect trap. There was no way around it. My heart sank. The whiskey wasn't helping. I slumped back in my chair, defeated. Maybe Carol had won. Maybe we'd just have to take it down in the dead of night and pretend it never happened. But then, my eyes drifted a few pages over, to Section 8, Additions to the Primary Residence. It was a different world. The language was less prohibitive, more procedural. It talked about submitting plans, about adhering to city building codes, about structures like sunrooms, patios, and decks. Decks. The word hung in the air. I reread the section. And then I read it again. The rules were about things attached to the house. It specified setback requirements from property lines, railing height regulations, and material pre-approvals. It was restrictive, sure, but it wasn't a flat-out no. It was a, show us your plans and we'll see. A slow, mischievous grin spread across my face. An idea began to form. A beautiful, idiotic, magnificent idea. It was born of spite, fueled by whiskey, and absolutely, positively ridiculous. I bolted upright. "Sarah!" I whisper-yelled into the living room. "I think I've got it." She came into the kitchen, looking wary. I had the binder open, my finger pointing triumphantly at the page. "Okay, stay with me here," I said, trying to contain my excitement. "The bylaw says no freestanding auxiliary structures. Freestanding is the key word." "It's in a tree, Mark. It's the definition of freestanding from the house." "But what if it wasn't?" I asked, my grin widening. "What if the tree fort was no longer a freestanding auxiliary structure? What if it became an extension of our house?" She stared at me, completely baffled. "How could it possibly be an extension of our house? Are you going to pick up the house and move it under the tree?" "Even better," I said, barely able to contain myself. "We build a bridge." Her eyes widened. "A bridge?" "Not just a bridge, a suspended walkway. From the second-floor landing of our back door, straight to the tree fort. If we anchor it to the house, it's technically an addition. The tree fort is no longer a tree fort. It becomes the terminal platform of an elevated deck." Sarah was silent for a full 10 seconds, processing the sheer audacity of the plan. She looked at me, at the binder, and back at me. A slow smile crept onto her face, a mixture of horror, amusement, and, I think, a little bit of pride. "So, let me get this straight," she said, trying not to laugh. "You're going to build a rope bridge from our house to the tree fort, 40 feet across the yard, just so you can call it a deck and get around Carol?" I nodded proudly. "An elevated deck with a rustic, suspended walkway feature. It's not just a deck, honey. It's a lifestyle. It's a declaration of independence." She shook her head, letting out a short laugh. "You're completely insane." She paused, then took a sip of her wine. "Okay, but you're not building it with the same tools you used for the bookshelf. You have to hire a professional." It was the most beautiful yes I had ever heard. Finding a contractor willing to build a spite bridge turned out to be harder than I thought. The first company I called, Prestige Patios and Decks, was a non-starter. I got about halfway through my explanation before the guy on the other end interrupted me. "Sir, are you asking me to build a rope bridge to a children's treehouse to circumvent an HOA bylaw?" he asked, in a tone that suggested I'd just asked him to help me dispose of a body. "Well, when you say it like that, it sounds a little unprofessional," I replied. "I prefer rustic, suspended walkway feature." He hung up on me. The next 2 calls went similarly. One guy laughed for a solid 30 seconds before telling me his insurance would never cover it. Another just said no, and the line went dead. It seemed the world of licensed and insured contractors was not ready for my brand of creative problem-solving. I was losing hope. My grand plan was going to die because no one was crazy enough to help me build it. Dejected, I was flipping through one of those free local classifieds papers that mostly advertises lawn aeration and psychic readings when I saw it. A small, unassuming ad at the bottom of a page, wedged between a guy selling used hubcaps and a notice for a lost cat named Mittens. The ad was simple, printed in a thick, no-nonsense font. "Salty Sal's Renovations. No job too weird. If they say it can't be done, call Sal." It had a phone number and nothing else. It was perfect. I called, and a gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "Sal's." I took a deep breath and launched into my pitch, expecting another rejection. I explained the tree fort, the letter, the bylaw, and my loophole theory about the elevated deck. I finished, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear what sounded like a man taking a long, slow drag from a cigarette. Finally, the gravelly voice spoke. "Let me get this straight. You want to build a 40-foot rope bridge from your house to a tree house just to stick it to the HOA, lady?" "That's the essence of it, yes," I said. There was another pause, and then a low, rumbling chuckle that sounded like rocks in a tumble dryer. "I'll be there in an hour," he said, and hung up. An hour later, A beat-up Ford F-150 that looked like it had survived a war rumbled up my driveway. The truck was a patchwork of primer gray and faded blue, and the passenger side door was held shut with a bungee cord. A man who had to be Sal climbed out. He was probably in his late 60s, with a thick, wiry gray beard that had visible traces of sawdust in it. He wore a grease-stained t-shirt that said, "I'm retired, go ask someone else," which I took as a positive sign. He had a tape measure hooked to his belt and a look on his face that said he'd seen it all. He walked into my backyard, took one look at the tree fort, and then turned to me. "So this is the scene of the crime." "The site of the project," I corrected. He grunted, walking a slow circle around the oak tree, his expert eyes scanning every joint and support beam of my amateur handiwork. "Not bad for a desk jockey," he conceded. "It won't fall down tomorrow anyway." Coming from him, it felt like high praise. I invited him inside and laid out my battlefield. The HOA letter, the tome of torment open to the relevant pages, and my napkin sketch of the bridge. He looked at the letter from Carol first, his eyes narrowing as he read the words aesthetic disharmony. He let out a snort of derision. "Aesthetic disharmony," he growled. "That's what they say when they ain't got a real reason. I once had an HOA tell me my truck was too commercially aggressive to be parked in my own driveway. I told them my truck's personality was none of their business." He was the one. He was my guy. He spent the next hour with me poring over the bylaws like a scholar studying ancient texts. He was a savant of spite, a master of malicious compliance. "See, here's their mistake," he said, jabbing a thick finger at the page. "They specify railing height on decks has to be 36 inches, but they don't specify what the railing has to be made of. Rope. Netting. As long as a 4-inch sphere can't pass through it, it's code." He grabbed my napkin sketch and a pencil from behind his ear. "We don't call it a rope bridge. That sounds like a toy. We call it a tensioned cable suspension walkway. We don't have a tree fort. We have a terminus observation platform. We're not building a toy, kid. We're building an addition. We spent the rest of the afternoon drawing up a new plan. It looked professional, almost intimidating. It was filled with official-sounding terms Sal spat out like he was born speaking them. We specified pressure-treated pine for the anchor platform on the house, galvanized steel cables for the main supports of the bridge, and a dual-layer nylon rope netting for the handrails. We drew cross-sections and elevation views. Sal even added a little box for a city permit number, leaving it blank for now. When we were done, we had a single sheet of paper that transformed a crazy idea into a legitimate-looking construction project. Sal leaned back, a look of immense satisfaction on his weathered face. "You want to stick it to Carol over on Elm Street with this?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye. "That's the plan," I confirmed. He slapped his hand on the table. "Kid, I'll do it for half price. This is the Lord's work." We shook on it. The alliance was formed. Operation Rope Bridge was a go. The first official act of war was a trip to the HOA's management office. I strode in, head held high, and slapped our beautifully rendered, jargon-filled blueprint onto the counter. The receptionist blinked at me. I asked to submit it to the Architectural Review Committee. I even filled out the proper form, T-117B, Application for Exterior Alteration. Carol, who just so happened to be there, volunteering her time, snatched the paper from the receptionist's hand. Her face went through a fascinating series of micro-expressions as she read the title, Proposed Elevated Deck and Walkway Addition for Stanton Residence, 112 Maple Lane. She looked from the paper to me, her eyes narrowed into tiny slits of pure suspicion. "A deck?" she stammered. "That's right, Carol," I said with a cheerful, unassailable politeness. "We decided the tree fort just wasn't accessible enough. This will be much better for our property value. It's all in the plan. I look forward to the committee's prompt approval." The look on her face, a perfect storm of confusion, rage, and the dawning horror that she was being outmaneuvered, was more satisfying than 1,000 victories. She couldn't reject it out of hand. Per her own precious rules, the committee had 30 days to review any submitted plan. I had just bought myself 30 days of construction time. I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. The next day, Sal's war-torn F-150 rumbled into the driveway, and the work began. The sound of saws and hammering now echoed through the tranquil cul-de-sac, from dawn till dusk. We started with the anchor platform, a sturdy 8x8-foot deck attached directly to the back of our house, just outside the second-floor door that led to a tiny, useless balcony. Sal worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing to watch. He moved like a man half his age, sinking 4x4 posts into concrete footings and framing the platform with practiced ease. The project immediately became the neighborhood's primary source of entertainment. Morning joggers would slow their pace as they passed. Cars would linger at the stop sign a little longer than necessary. We had two distinct factions. On one side was old Mrs. Gable from across the street, who would give me a sly thumbs up from her garden whenever she saw me. One afternoon, she brought over a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of cookies for me and Sal. "Give 'em hell, Mark," she whispered with a conspiratorial wink. On the other side were Carol's loyalists. The most vocal was Gary from 2 doors down, a man whose entire personality was his perfectly manicured zoysia grass. He'd stand on the edge of his property, arms crossed, just staring. Every time Sal's saw roared to life, Gary would flinch as if he'd been physically wounded. I knew he was giving Carol a play-by-play. By the end of the first week, the anchor platform was done, and we started on the most ambitious part, the bridge itself. Sal, using a system of ropes and pulleys I didn't understand, expertly hoisted 2 thick galvanized steel cables from the house platform to the tree fort. We secured them to the oak tree using massive eye bolts that Sal assured me were strong enough to hold his truck. These were the bones of our bridge. Carol couldn't stand it anymore. One Saturday afternoon, she marched across her lawn and onto mine, clipboard in hand. She was practically vibrating with indignation, and "Mark!" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Sal and I were on the platform, weaving the thick rope flooring of the bridge. We both paused and looked down. "Why, hello, Carol," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured friendliness. "Come to admire our progress?" "This is a clear and egregious violation of Bylaw 7, she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at our work. "That is a tree fort. You are building a bridge to a tree fort." I adopted a look of thoughtful confusion. I tapped my chin. "I'm sorry, I think you're mistaken. As you can see from the plans your committee is currently reviewing, this is the rustic oak integrated terminus of our new elevated deck. We're currently installing the tensioned cable suspension walkway." "Do you like the finish on the pressure-treated pine? I thought it had a lovely, natural feel." Sal spat a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby bush. "It's all up to code, ma'am," he grunted. Carol's face was turning a fascinating shade of magenta. This is a mockery. You are making a mockery of our community's standards." "On the contrary, Carol," I said, leaning on the railing, "I'm following the rules to the letter. A process I'm sure you, of all people, can appreciate." She was speechless, utterly, incandescently speechless. She just stood there, sputtering like a broken engine, before turning on her heel and marching back to her house. The blinds of Gary's house twitched in solidarity. The bridge took another week. We wove the rope floor, a tight, sturdy net that was surprisingly stable. Then came the handrails, a fine mesh of black nylon safety netting stretched between thick rope uprights. It was ridiculous. It was glorious. It was a 40-foot-long monument to a loophole. Leo was in a state of constant, ecstatic awe. Every day after school, he'd run out and stare up at it. When it was finally done, Sal and I stood back on the lawn to admire our creation. The bridge swayed gently in the breeze, a perfect, absurd link between the beige conformity of the house and the wild freedom of the tree. "You know," Sal said, wiping his hands on a rag, "in 30 years of construction, I ain't never built anything this stupid, or this beautiful." I couldn't have agreed more. The dragon had breathed her fire, and we had answered with rope, wood, and pure, unadulterated spite. And we weren't done yet. Carol, having been thoroughly defeated by the power of paperwork and sarcasm, decided to escalate. If the HOA's laws wouldn't stop me, she would turn to a higher power. The municipal government. Or, more specifically, the local police department. I suppose in her mind, what we were doing was so offensive to the natural order of suburbia that it had to be criminal. It was a Thursday afternoon. Sal had just left for the day, and I was on the deck, tightening a few last bolts on the railing. Leo was inside, doing his homework. It was peaceful. And then the peace was shattered by the sight of a police cruiser rolling slowly, purposefully, down our street. It didn't just drive by, it pulled up and parked directly in front of my house. My heart did a little tap dance against my ribs. Okay, this was new. This was a level of escalation I hadn't fully anticipated. I saw Mrs. Gable's curtains twitch. Gary was, of course, already standing on his porch, a smug look on his face. He looked like a man who had just tattled to the teacher and was eagerly awaiting the punishment. 2 officers got out of the car. They were young, professional, and looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. They walked up my driveway with the slow, deliberate gait of people who were being paid by the hour to deal with something stupid. I descended from the deck and met them on the lawn, trying to project an aura of calm, law-abiding citizenship. "Afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" The taller of the 2, whose name tag read Miller, gestured vaguely towards the backyard. "Sir, we received a call about a construction dispute? Something about an unsafe structure and a public nuisance." "Ah," I said, nodding sagely. "Yes, that would be Carol, over on the corner. Did she mention aesthetic disharmony by any chance?" The other officer, Davis, cracked a tiny, almost imperceptible smile before schooling his features back to neutral. The caller expressed concern that the structure wasn't permitted and posed a danger, Miller said, all business. "Would you mind if we took a look?" "Not at all," I said, leading them through the side gate into the backyard. They stopped and just stared. They looked at the house. They looked at the tree. They looked at the magnificent, ridiculous rope bridge connecting the 2. They looked at each other. I could see Officer Davis fighting a losing battle with a grin. Miller, to his credit, remained professional. He walked over to the base of the anchor platform. He kicked one of the 4x4 posts. It didn't budge. "So, that's a deck?" he asked, pointing up. It was a simple question, but the entire fate of my project seemed to hang on the answer. "Yes, officer," I said, with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times. "An elevated deck with a suspended walkway. I have the plans right here, if you'd like to see them. Submitted them to the HOA and everything." I produced the rolled-up blueprint from just inside the back door. Miller took it and unrolled it, studying the jargon-filled diagram. Davis peered over his shoulder. "Tensioned cable suspension walkway," Davis read under his breath, and I saw his shoulders shake slightly. He turned away, pretending to examine the oak tree with great interest. "And the HOA is disputing this?" Miller asked, handing the plan back. "The HOA president believes it's an unapproved tree fort," I explained calmly. I maintain that because it is physically anchored to the primary residence, it is legally an addition to the house, and therefore a deck is. It's a matter of architectural classification, really. Miller stared at the bridge again, then back at me. Architectural classification, he repeated deadpan. I saw it then, in his eyes. He got it. He understood the entire, petty, wonderful absurdity of the situation. From across the lawn, Carol had emerged, clipboard in hand, ready to provide her witness testimony. "Officers," she called, marching over, "this man has flagrantly disregarded the community bylaws. This structure is a menace." Miller turned to her. "Ma'am, is the structure wobbling? Does it look like it's about to fall down?" "Well, no, but—" "Is it on your property?" "No, but it impacts my property." "Is anyone in immediate physical danger because of it?" "That is not the point," she sputtered. "The point is the rules." Officer Miller sighed the sigh of a man who had dealt with 1,000 Carols. He turned back to me. "Sir, do you have a city permit for this deck?" "Applied for," I said, which was technically true. Sal had mailed the application yesterday. "It's in process." That was enough for him. He turned to his partner. "Looks like a civil matter to me, Davis." Davis nodded. "Yep, civil matter." Miller faced Carol. "Ma'am, there's no criminal act occurring here. If you have a dispute with your neighbor over a bylaw, that's for the HOA to handle. It's not a police matter." He then gave me a firm look. "Sir, make sure you get that permit sorted out. Have a good day." They turned and walked away, leaving Carol standing on my lawn, her mouth hanging open. As they got back in their car, I saw Officer Davis lean over to his partner and say something. They both broke into laughter as they drove away. It was a glorious, resounding victory. I had faced the law, and the law was, apparently, amused. Gary, from his porch, looked utterly crestfallen. I gave him a little wave. He went back inside and slammed the door. The departure of the police car was not the end. It was merely the end of a chapter. Carol, publicly thwarted and humiliated, retreated to her lair and plotted her final, ultimate revenge. She could no longer rely on the police, so she turned to the one entity more powerful and more feared than any HOA, the City Code Enforcement Office. A week later, 2 letters arrived on the same day. The first was from the HOA. It was a formal rejection of my plan for the elevated deck. The reasoning was a masterwork of bureaucratic nonsense, citing that the terminus platform relies on a non-permanent living foundation, that is, the tree, and was therefore not a true addition. It was accompanied by an order to cease and desist all activity and a bill for the first week of non-compliance fines. The second letter was from the city. It was short and to the point. A formal complaint had been filed regarding unpermitted and potentially unsafe construction at my address. An inspector would be arriving on Friday at 10 a.m. to assess the structure. His name was Mr. Henderson. The letter had the cold, impartial finality of a death sentence. This was it. The final showdown. The battle that would decide everything. "So, what happens if this Mr. Henderson says it's not a deck?" Sarah asked that night, her voice tight with anxiety. "Then, we have a very expensive unpermitted tree fort," I said, "and a whole lot of fines." Friday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky that perfectly matched my mood. Sal came over early, dressed in a clean polo shirt with Sal's Renovations embroidered on it. He looked more professional than I'd ever seen him. He was my legal counsel, my structural expert, and my moral support all rolled into one. He had a file folder tucked under his arm containing a copy of our blueprint, the city permit application, and a dog-eared copy of the municipal building code. At precisely 10 a.m., a modest city-owned sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in his 50s got out. He wore steel-toed boots, khaki pants, and a clipboard. He had a stern, unreadable expression on his face. This was Mr. Henderson. He looked like a man who had never laughed at a joke in his entire life. And, of course, from across the street, Carol emerged. She had her own clipboard. It was a clipboard duel at high noon. She positioned herself on the edge of my property, a silent, smug observer ready to witness my downfall. "Mr. Henderson?" I said, extending a hand. "Mark Stanton. This is my contractor, Sal." Henderson gave a curt nod, his eyes already scanning the structure that loomed over the backyard. "I've got a complaint here about an unpermitted deck and walkway," he said, his voice a flat monotone. "Let's have a look." For the next 30 minutes, he conducted the most thorough, nerve-wracking inspection I have ever witnessed. He didn't just look, he investigated. He started at the base, checking the concrete footings of the house-side platform. He pulled out a level and placed it on the deck boards. He measured the height of the railings down to the 1/8 of an inch. He took a small 4-inch ball out of his pocket, the infamous sphere from Sal's earlier lesson, and tried to push it through the safety netting of the bridge railing. It wouldn't fit. Sal was magnificent. He shadowed Henderson, answering his terse questions with calm, technical precision. "What are you using for your joist hangers?" Henderson grunted. "Galvanized G90S, rated for exterior use with pressure-treated lumber," Sal replied without missing a beat. "Anchor bolts into the house ledger. 1/2-inch galvanized lags, staggered, 2 per joist bay, straight into the band joist." It was like watching 2 high priests of a secret construction religion speaking in tongues. Then, Henderson turned his attention to the bridge itself. He walked out onto it, jumping up and down in the middle. My heart leaped into my throat. The bridge swayed, as it was designed to, but it held firm. He walked to the tree fort side, the terminus platform, and performed the same rigorous inspection. He examined the massive eye bolts securing the cables to the oak tree, tugging on them with his full weight. All the while Carol stood there, a vulture waiting for the kill. I could practically hear her internal monologue. Find something. Please find something wrong." Finally, Henderson completed his circuit. He walked back to the middle of the lawn and stood there, making notes on his clipboard. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. The entire neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. This was the moment of judgment. He finally looked up, his gaze sweeping from me to Sal to a practically vibrating Carol. "Well," he began, and the world seemed to stop spinning. "It's unconventional. I've never seen anything quite like it." My stomach dropped. "Here it comes. The anchor points to the primary residence are sound," he continued, his voice still a flat monotone. "The railing height is to code. The safety netting meets regulations. The walkway itself is stable for its intended purpose." He paused, clicking his pen. He looked directly at me. "Your contractor used the wrong type of joist hanger on the far platform. Those are for interior use. You need to replace them with stainless steel, and you need to add a second handrail on the staircase leading up to the main platform." He tore a sheet from his clipboard. "That's a correctable violation. Fix it within 30 days and call for a follow-up. It's a $50 administrative fine." I was stunned. A $50 fine, that was it? So it passes inspection?" I stammered. Henderson looked at Carol, who seemed to be turning to stone. "Ma'am, I don't enforce aesthetics. I enforce the city's safety code. As far as the city of Maple Creek is concerned, this structure is a deck." He handed me the citation. "Have a good day." And with that, he turned, walked back to his sedan, and drove away. Carol's face was a priceless artifact of human emotion. Her smug certainty collapsed into disbelief, which then curdled into pure, impotent rage. But it's a tree fort!" she shrieked at my back. "It's attached to a tree!" I turned around, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across my face. I held up the citation. "Not anymore, Carol," I said. "It's a deck, and it's got a $50 fine to prove it." She just stood there, her clipboard hanging limply at her side, utterly and completely defeated. The dragon had been slain by a mountain of paperwork and a $50 fine for the wrong kind of joist hangers. The departure of Mr. Henderson's sedan was like the final scene of a movie. The villain was vanquished. The credits were ready to roll. Sal clapped me on the back so hard I nearly coughed up a lung. "Told you, kid," he boomed, a huge grin splitting his whiskered face. "The rules are only a problem if you don't know how to read 'em." News of the verdict spread through the neighborhood with the speed of suburban gossip, which is to say, faster than light. My phone started buzzing with texts from neighbors I barely knew, sending me thumbs up and crying laughing emojis. Mrs. Gable appeared on her porch and raised her gardening trowel in a silent, triumphant salute. The legend of the spite deck was officially cemented. I was no longer just Mark Stanton from 112 Maple Lane. I was the guy who beat the HOA. To celebrate, Sarah and I decided to throw an inaugural deck party that Saturday. It wasn't a big affair. We invited Sal, of course, who was the guest of honor. We invited Mrs. Gable and a few other families who had offered quiet support during the ordeal. It was a perfect autumn afternoon. We grilled hot dogs on the patio below, and the kids, led by a beaming Leo, treated the bridge and fort like the world's greatest amusement park ride. They ferried plates of chips and cookies up the snack pulley, chattering and laughing in their castle in the sky. Sal, holding a beer and a hot dog, looked up at the contraption. "You know," he said to me, "I'm going to put this in my portfolio, right between kitchen remodel 2019 and bathroom grout ceiling." Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the other guests had gone home. Sarah was inside, cleaning up. I was sitting on the edge of the terminus platform, the old tree fort, dangling my feet, when Leo came and sat beside me. For a while, we didn't say anything. We just watched the lights start to come on in the houses around us. Below us, our backyard was cast in long shadows. From here, you could see everything. You could see Gary's obsessively perfect lawn, and you could see the corner house, where a single lamp cast a square of yellow light from Carol's window. "Dad?" Leo said quietly. "Yeah, buddy?" "This is the best castle in the whole world," he said, leaning his head against my arm. "Thanks for not letting the grumpy lady make us tear it down." I put my arm around his small shoulders and pulled him close. The smell of sawdust and autumn leaves seemed to cling to the old wood. I looked at the rope bridge stretching back to our house, a crazy, beautiful, and defiant link between two worlds. It was more than just a deck. It was a testament, a story we would tell for years. In the end, it was never really about the wood, the nails, or the rope. It was about the simple, fundamental idea that a kid's joy shouldn't have to comply with a 3-ring binder of suburban sadness. It was about the principle that aesthetic harmony shouldn't trump a child's imagination. And if you have to build a ridiculous, probably not entirely legal rope bridge deck to prove that point, well, some views are worth the climb. I saw the blinds twitch in Carol's window, a familiar, spidery movement in the twilight. I knew she was watching. I smiled, put my arm around my son, and gave a slow, deliberate wave. This time, I didn't feel angry or defiant. I just felt happy. I was a king, sitting with his prince in our crooked castle in the sky, and all was right with the world.